So what I'm hoping to do today is to introduce the product that we've created, and I'd like to say nobody's going to make any money out of whether you use this or not. Just at the start, we're not selling in that sense. And I want to talk about some of the reasons behind the project and as far as students and teachers go, and to demonstrate a little bit how it might work for other people using it. So this is our project title, Collaborative Numeracy, and it's created mainly for teachers, for people that can't come to city-based PD, people in remote places, or people who just can't find the time to get away. And it's ideally created for a presenter that might be working with a group of teachers, no matter how small, or it could be a small group of teachers getting together and doing it themselves. But it can also be done by people at home. Just look at it and get the idea of what we're talking about. And you could also incorporate small amounts of this into other meetings, or if you've got a whole session of moderation or something, this could be a sort of light relief, really. My background is I've spent a lot of time working with a lot of people, many decades. I'm not going into years anymore. And lots of workplaces, lots of teacher training, and a lot of professional development. And the latest professional development that I've been doing over here, and the reason for many jaunts backwards and forwards on the plane, is that we've been offering intensive programs of collaborative numeracy professional development for teachers. And that's involved us all getting together for a day and a half, once a month for 3 months. And it's been teachers from, well, mainly literacy and language teachers, some vocational teachers as well, people that haven't been teaching maths all their lives, but we've also had maths teachers doing it as well. And partly it's to increase their own numeracy confidence, but partly it's to give them new methods to teach it to increase students' numeracy confidence. And we call this sandwich model of PD because it means we do a bit, they go away and they can come back, they can try things out and they come back and they can discuss them, they can adapt them and bring it back. And it gives time for it all to sink in. Now, that in my mind is the best PD you can offer, but it's expensive for people, it's hard to get away. So what we've tried to do is to capture some of this in a video and a kit with notes to help people use them and to give them the materials that they need to use them. And a lot of the materials that we'll be referring to are from an online resource from Victoria, from the Victorian Adult Literacy and Basic Education Council, and most of that is free to download for teachers, so they're not making any money either. So you will be getting, this will be on the site if you see information go past that you don't get, but I have put together this resource from a lot of old things, and there's a lot of new things on it as well, but it's trying to gather all the things that have become out of date, things that have gone out of print now that the government doesn't actually fund anybody to disseminate materials, so they've decided to put it online. So there is a lot of good numeracy stuff in there. Now, back to the kit that we're talking about today, we're hoping that the videos are going to capture the atmosphere of workshops for people that can't go, and that includes the voices of the teachers who participated, but we're not going to make people sit through whole workshops, so it's really highly edited, and it's also supplemented with bits of commentary, information about the activities and details about where to get the resources. Now, I just want to go back to some of the reasons for this project, really. As you probably all know, and I certainly do after all my experience, Australia has a problem with the numeracy levels of its adults and youth, and there's some really scary statistics about how many people can't calculate 10% of something, in fact don't even know what it means. So usually we find that any adults or young people that have low numeracy levels are particularly anxious about having to go back and learn anything about numeracy or maths. And I think that if people are anxious about it, then what you have to create is a classroom that's totally different from what they went through before. Because if it's just like it was at school, then all of that's going to come back. Anyway, I'm going to now use some clips from the videos to sort of talk about, well, to discuss this a little bit further. They're quite short, so we won't be watching them for too long. We started the workshop with an awareness exercise. The group was given these questions, or prompts really, and asked to jot down their initial responses individually. I always do some version of this. I give participants time to have a think and remember their own maths learning experiences and feelings. Then they share them in small groups. Okay, can we just share some of what you've been talking about? And let's start with the memories of maths. Has anything stood out at any of the tables? What about the back table? Yeah?
Reciting times tables.
Reciting, oh yes.
I've never forgotten them, ever.
What I remember most about maths at school?
Seems like all of our maths teachers, despite their, style, their poor style or their mono style, we all went through the same experience of talk and some of us being okay with that and others not.
We all have different learning styles indeed, yeah. Which is what that thing about reciting tables is. There's other theories that visual people didn't do so well reciting and they needed other ways.
Different treatment of students, Beth. You know, if you were the student who was really good and you asked a question, the teacher would stop and answer you. But if you were the student who kind of always got it wrong or whatever, you'd be told to pay attention. You know, so I think there was a different validity put on different students' questions.
All the subjects that we learn at school, maths is always, it's got a right answer and that's it, it's got one answer.
It's just struck me is that I'm not convinced my maths teachers were very good at making a link between what you're doing in the classroom and what you might do with it.
The debrief discussion produced quite a lot of laughter, particularly a memory of grey cardigans, the stereotypical maths teacher's uniform. We all roared laughing at that, but although it was really funny, I think there's more to it than just the clothes, unfortunately. I think it probably represents a feeling of greyness that surrounds many adults' memories of maths classes. That's really sad. This activity generates lots of shared stories, memories and fears. It's good to get it in the open because maths anxiety is a very real factor for both learners and for teachers who aren't maths specialists. The participants' memories and reflections always produce a list of factors I want to cover in the workshop. The last question, or prompt, a good numeracy teacher, allows the teachers to come up with a list of practices they'd like to adopt as adult numeracy teachers. This means we finish the discussion on a positive note. I think that is, well, all of that's important, but praising people and remembering to praise and remembering that their confidence is what's going to drive their learning in the end, so helping them to find the thing that makes them confident and remembering that this is the struggle that we're helping them with is a really important thing. Okay, so the first video that we've seen a couple of clips from is a lot about setting the scene for why people need to change from chalk and talk in schools to something different that's going to engage students. And one of the things that I strongly believe that will alleviate the anxiety that people feel is collaborating. So that's why we've called this series Collaborative Numeracy, and it's collaborative in teaching strategies. The sort of method of professional development that we use is collaborative, and it's been a big collaboration between our really good tech guys at the back here from Perth and myself from Melbourne. So there's been a lot of collaboration. As well as talking about collaborative activities, which we're going to have a look at some later on, it covers an awful lot of other teaching strategies like using hands-on material and trying to make meaning out of mathematics instead of just remembering formula. Now, the other thing that my extensive experience has told me is that many teachers are very anxious about their maths, and a lot of literacy and language teachers are being asked to include numeracy in their teaching, and that makes them very anxious. And I also know a lot of primary teachers who wouldn't even teach grades 5 and 6 because they were scared of the maths. So there's a lot of teachers out there that also are maths anxious in a big way, and they are afraid of having to teach numeracy. So we're hoping that this program will help them overcome that as well. Partly to give them new confidence in their own numeracy by doing the activities and discussing some of the ideas, and partly by giving them new methods, so it means they don't have to become like that maths teacher that they remember at school. Literacy teachers often don't come to professional development when it's numeracy because they suddenly feel sick that day. They don't realise why they're feeling sick, and others will come and say, I had a headache but I forced myself to come. Things like that. So it can happen at all sorts of different levels. But it can cause students to avoid numeracy classes or act up in numeracy classes. And for most of us, or most of us have thought about that, think that it is strongly associated with this lack of meaning in school. What people talked about, it didn't mean anything, I couldn't see why we were doing it, and never understanding the purpose of anything we did. So it's lots of rules and formula that don't have any meaning whatsoever. One of the favourites being the rule for dividing fractions. Turn it upside down and multiply it. Why? Doesn't matter, just do it. That's the rule. People have said to me, and I think it's true, that it's not your fault if you don't know another way to teach maths because we've all been taught one particular way. Because for years in secondary schools I was searching for other ways and not finding them. So rather than being all the things we talked about it before, we don't want to make it abstract, we want to make it connected to something. We want to make it as visual as we can. We want to make it hands-on, and something I'm going to talk a lot about, linked to language. And not silent and competitive like it was in school, but cooperative and relying very much rich in interaction and discussion. So at the moment, so that's sort of the motivation behind doing all this work. And at the moment we've got 4 titles, one that we've seen a couple of clips from already. The next one we're going to have a look at. Possibly we'll have time to look at some of the third one. And the fourth one we're not looking at today, but it's quite useful at making sense of volume formula in a more interesting and fun manner. There's 4 more to come that we're working on at the moment, and they won't be long in the pipeline, I don't think, so they'll be available, and they're going right back to the meaning of fractions, some more stuff on volume, and one about trying to make sense of subtraction using hands-on materials, and another one about estimating lengths. Okay, in the kit, the videos are available either online through the YouTube, or we'll be putting them on DVD as well for people who don't have a reliable access to the internet. And they'll be accompanied by user notes which will advise teachers on how to interact and how to get the maximum advantage so that they're not just watching the video, but they're actually creating an interactive section. And they'll give information on how to conduct the session, how to prepare the materials and all that sort of thing that you need to do something properly. And in that, we're getting two major types of techniques. One I'm thinking of as do, then view, which you'll use an activity and then view the discussion on the YouTube. And yeah, that's like we just saw, because what the notes say in the Dismantling Maths Anxiety video, which is the first one. Okay, so in the user notes, we have information for the teacher running the session. So it advises people before you watch the video, fill out the attitude to teaching numeracy page, take about 5 to 8 minutes, so we're telling them about time frames. The handout's provided so that the presenter can give out the copies of the handbook. Everyone can have a look at that. Then they can have a discussion, about 10 to 15 minutes. Then they can view the video, which we've just been viewing tiny bits of, and then after the video, what they can do with their students and what reading that they might want to do to further inform themselves of that idea. Now, the second technique we're going to have a go at now, and that's first view. If it's a complex activity, you first of all view other people doing it on screen, and then you can have a go at it yourself. So that's what we're going to do at the moment. Cooperative logic, it's a small group activity, and it relies very much on the pieces in the centre of the table, but it's got really particular rules for sharing, and it's tightly structured in such a way that if you do it properly, everyone has to participate, which is why the rules are important. I'm going to start with the simplest of them. On each table, I'm going to put a problem. We're going to have a map, goes in the centre of the table. We're going to have clue cards, which do not go into the centre of the table, but are given round to the people. Some people will get 2, some people will get 1. And we're going to have the manipulable pieces. In this case, we've got a map, we've got shops, and we've got clues on how the shops are arranged. The shops are going to be arranged on the map in the shaded area. You use the clues one by one to decide how that's going to happen.
The store and the post office are on corners.
How about if we set that one to there? Does that make any sense? You have to go back and look at to my one.
One by one, they read them out aloud, but they don't put them down on the table. So others find out what's on the card by actually listening to the person that's reading, not grabbing anybody's clues and not giving away our information. Anyone can read their card as aloud as often as is needed until the problem is solved. And so we're cooperatively solving the problem.
The chemist shop is east of the supermarket.
Walking from the supermarket to the chemist, you pass the dress shop.
Doesn't necessarily mean it's between. The chemist shop could be there, couldn't it? But it's between. That's true.
The department store and the post office are on corners.
How about if we set that one to there? Does that make any sense? You have to go back and look at to my one. The post office is south of the chemist and next to the shoe shop. That's good.
What we were listening to there was an example of exploratory speech, working things out or exploring an idea together that results from this kind of cooperative format. It's a welcome contrast to the normal explanatory speech heard in numeracy classes, where one person simply tells the other how to do something.
Southwest, but I actually needed to physically point to the table.
How about if we set that one to there? Does that make sense?
There was an east.
We all right?
We think so.
Okay.
We're quite...
How would we know that we were all right? For sure.
Yeah, nothing is maybe.
Yeah, so you've checked them all? Yeah. Because I think it's really important with students to get them to self-check rather than expect you to come around and say it's right. You say, can you find out? If you're right, how would you know? Okay, so there are a range of these, and I just want to show you how this would work with the video session, is that you would show that first bit like we did, so people get the method and whatnot, and then we've supplemented it with other bits of information so that you can, as a presenter, you can then play a little bit more. So we show a bit more of the action on the video. How did people work out where east was once they had north on the map?
And then there's all the acronyms and the little songs. Never eat soggy Weet-Bix and... No? Never eat soggy Weet-Bix.
A lot of people use the map of Australia as a reference. So there's little bits like that come in so people get other ideas, and of course advice to the presenter to ask the people in their workshop how they would work out north, south, east, west, etc. A much more advanced problem was also used so that these teachers could experience how it feels to be totally engaged with a problem that challenges them. There are 2 of these authentic street directory activities involving maps and keys published in Breaking the Maths Barrier. They were originally designed to encourage literacy teachers to focus on street directories and the knowledge and skills their students needed to know how to use them. You can see how much these teachers had to concentrate to solve the problem.
So the car's been on all Bishop Street, going north-south. Doesn't it say near the corner? Near the corner?
Or the car travelling west past the school.
So there. And then we've got him going past the other ones.
Well, that could be Fisher Street there then as well.
He's not actually going up Fisher Street.
Yeah, he went along Fisher Street.
He went along. That's the only one along that he nearly collided with, perhaps. Or maybe here too.
That's what I'm thinking.
So probably this corner that they turned around. And he went past all 3 churches.
Traffic lights.
So
I've got another clue about a phone box, because we need to find telephone. Some kids in a phone box saw it speed straight through a red light. There's a telephone. And is there a traffic light?
You can see that this group is still concentrating after having spent quite a long time on the task. This is an example of one of the advantages of group work. Students' willingness to persevere longer at an activity when working together than they would by themselves. So you can give them more challenging activities to do in small groups than you could individually. So just adding to that, people will learn from each other, so they can listen to each other's logic, because by then they're really wanting to solve the problem together. So it's a really good way of getting people to engage with conceptual thinking and language. I'm just going on to another clip. One of the things I do with students to get them to extend the language, they've been understanding the language, but they haven't used it. So one thing after that they've done several of those simple map things would be to get them to create a problem themselves. Then we go from reading the language to having to use it themselves. They've got all the models there, they just have to use them and create their own sentences. And then they pass it on to another group to solve. That gets very interesting because students really like to make it hard so the others can't solve it, but you have to say that they don't win. If nobody can solve the problem, they're not winning either. A successful problem is one other people can solve. But it's a good strategy to get them engaged in the language and the language structures. In the workshop, we did this extension activity using some 3-dimensional problems called Build-Its. These involve creating structures with colour blocks and developing students' 3-dimensional spatial language such as on top of, below, behind. First, the group worked through 3 of the existing problems.
There's 6 blocks in the yellow one. Yeah. The green block shares a flat side with all other 5 blocks.
These 2 work because they share one edge, the blue one with each of the red, and the 2 reds don't touch each other, so that's okay.
2 blocks aren't touching each other to the 2 blue
Later,
ones.
they created their own problems for others to solve. Sometimes extensions like this can help you cope with a mixed level class. You ask the small groups who finish early to do the extension. That way, everyone can be gainfully occupied on similar content. The new problems they create can be tried out by other students another day.
There is only one of each colour.
No 2 blocks. Very nice.
No 2 blocks of the same colour. Yeah. Got that.
The next day, they watched while other groups solved their problems. They reported that actually being on the spot and seeing confusions or uncertainty created by their clues helped them to spot errors in expression very quickly.
Wow. Is that too hard to describe?
We should be able to do it. We need to be very clear about our definitions,
Is that too hard though?
They were talking, other ones talked about sides and edges, didn't they? And faces, face, side and edge.
I left that in because it's an example of how people have to go back and look at the language that was there before so that they use it. So she was very tactfully trying to say yes, but there was no circumstances where they were not sharing a whole edge and things like that. Cooperative logic is a particularly highly structured form of activity that really is designed so that everybody has to participate, at least when they read their clues out the first time. So it's a way of ensuring that everybody's involved. As a teacher, you have to go around and make sure everybody doesn't grab the clues and pull them over to themselves and keeps everyone involved, but that's a bit of your job. At least that is structured in such a way that the basis is there for everybody to participate. If people can't read or they don't feel comfortable reading, then you get them to maybe read them together or get somebody else to help them read their clue. I have heard of Indigenous groups that don't want to do it just by themselves and they will do it totally cooperatively, but it's all right. They still get into the problems and they're still reading the clues together. I mean, you try for the ideal and then you compromise however you have to. The reason that we use a lot of bits in the middle of the table is because then somebody can't grab the pen and it becomes their problem and everybody else tunes out. So I always use, even for the number problems, we have little digit cards. So you move them around until you get them to be the number that you want. So rather than just pen and paper, which is not the ideal.
So maybe just do a column of... Very nice. Liking your work so far?
The reason that the 5th is one of the chosen ones is it's not so easy, and therefore you have to think. And everybody in the group by then will be aware that all those 5ths need to be the same size of each other because there's a challenge. So it's not going to escape anybody's notice that that's what you're trying to do. These are a really good way of introducing a new topic. You've got adults that don't come like kids where you know who knows what and they're there the first day and you want to know if they know anything. A matching and sorting activity is a really good way to observe that. They can help each other so they're not going to feel too threatened, and you can use this to then go on and teach what you wanted to do, teach about fractions, or to find out that people didn't really know very much, so we can start with one of the simple ones and start from there talking about them. You can use them as revision. You're doing something else, but at the end of the session you I wonder if they still know anything about fractions or about graphs or about anything, so they can be quick revision. Something like this, if the session's gone on a long time, they're getting a little bit ragged with what they're doing or they've been working by themselves for too long, you can use one of these to change the energy, I think is how I think about it. And if they've all been doing individual work, it's a really good way to get people together for a little bit of interaction during that. And the informal assessment means you watching and making some notes about what you're observing about the groups working together and what they know. Okay, that was one of the examples from the interaction and discussion video. And in that, there's 3 different activity models. Now, matching activities, I call it a model because you can create your own really easily from that idea of things that go together and explore people's understanding, really. And the idea of the blanks is to, okay, they've got lots of examples on the table. Can we just push them that one little bit further so that they then create some themselves? Now, when I sent this out to trial when I was creating it, one of the teachers said, my students didn't like having those spare ones. She said they liked to have it all neat and they knew when they were finished. So if you didn't want them to be feeling like they didn't have closure, you could give the spares out later so they could feel closure. Then you give the spares out, then you give the blanks. So it just depends on your students, but they apparently were quite vocal about, well, this is good, but we don't like those ones that don't fit. We want it all neat and we want it complete. Now, the reason that I give the 1/5 as one of the fractions, can anybody guess what that reason would be? It's difficult. It's difficult to draw a geometric figure with a 1/5 that's the same size as everyone else. So by the time they've finished, everyone knows they were trying to create something that was the same size as all the other bits, and there were 5 of them. So that's why the 1/5. And the 3/8, because you actually have to count how many segments to verify that they're 8s, and 3 of them are shaded. So those 2 are slightly tricky because it requires a bit of conceptual thinking, and everybody in the group is then going to know what that conceptual thinking was because they have to work it out. So those 2 are chosen. And of course you could come back another day, you could make up more of those if you thought the students needed a bit more pushing. What we're hoping to do with these videos is run a pilot program this year, later, where we get some people to come and do some professional development so that they feel perfectly comfortable with them, and then go back and use the videos themselves with a group of people, and then perhaps report back on how it all worked and stuff. So as a model of professional development, we're interested in how that works as a way of spreading professional development, not only for this but for other things. And so we're hoping that maybe some of you or some of your colleagues or something might be interested, and can either indicate that to me or email Cheryl at a later date and say yes, you'd be interested. Okay, anyway, thank you very much for participating so keenly.